workshop can be answered in either English or Spanish, and our facilitators here will make the needed translations whenever necessary. Thank you all so much for coming. So I think the participants number is not increasing in a faster pace than it was 2 minutes ago, because people just entered in the exact time. So I'm going to seize this opportunity to have all the time that we can to talk with our own wonderful panelists. So without further ado, I'll share my screen to introduce this session. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Laila Sandroni, and I'm a staff fellow working with the IAI, the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. And I'm here to moderate this session, the TDO 101 session, part 2, based on case studies on applying the TD approach. So for starters, I'd like to share with everyone the agenda for the session. We'll start with this welcome and a summary of the previous session, the TD 101 part 1. And then we'll have the presentations of the case studies. We have here with us, thank you so much for coming, Zimi Muriz and Sarah Schweitzer with Start International, Marshall Valentine with JAWIC, Jamaican Women in Coffee, and Anne de Vernal from the University of Quebec in Montreal. Each of them will share insights about their projects in applying the TD approach in a really wide range of geographical territories. So we have a project applied in Africa, another one in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, and Anne de Vernal will talk about her work in the Arctic. After the presentations, we'll have a Q&A session directly from participants to the presenters that could last for 30 minutes tops. And then we'll have an open discussion on applying TD based on the main challenges and opportunities offered by applying such an approach. And then we'll have a conclusion. So to start, I'd like to give you a brief summary of session 1 and the context of this session. So as I was mentioning, this session is part of an initiative that was built through the partnership of the IAI, the Inter-American Institute. For those of you that are not familiar with the Institute, it's an intergovernmental organization that brings together 19 countries from across the Americas to support scientific knowledge and capacity building to address global environmental challenges. And the IAI, in partnership with the Belmont Forum, made this proposition of bringing to the SRI a TD 101 workshop. The idea was to bring the basics and foundations of the theoretical aspects and also the applied TD approach to populate the minds of those already working with TD, and also introduce this growing body of research and practice to people engaged in generating solutions and innovations to sustainability. So the first session was facilitated by Gabriela Alonso, Lily House Peters, and Marshall Valentine, who is gladly also here with us today. And it was on Monday, on June 20th, and provided participants with an introduction to the concept of transdisciplinarity and a conceptual foundation for doing and applying TD research with a focus on solution-oriented science for global environmental change. So the participants were invited to engage in conversations and exercises to recognize the key tenets of conducting TD research and to improve the design of equitable, inclusive, and ethic environments for knowledge production, integration, and also application. The key concepts that were explored by the facilitators in the first session included the co-production of knowledge, integration across diverse knowledge and value systems, and the challenge of transforming science to practice and to move from knowledge extension to knowledge application to inform policymaking and on-the-ground action. By the end of the session, the key concepts were illustrated also with the case of JAWIC, Jamaican Women in Coffee, and this on-the-ground discussion also invited participants to share learnings and perspectives on issues of relativism and how to relate with these diverse stakeholders while addressing the TD approach. So for this session, we have invited these three wonderful partners. And before I pass on the floor to them, I would just ask for us to have a general idea of the audience. If you could put in the chat the country that you call home, it might be where you are or maybe where you come from. And also, if you are doing TD research or applying a TD approach, in which specific topic are you working on? It might be climate change, health, biodiversity, food security, or even none. So if you could just say Brazil, biodiversity, this would be my my way of answering to those questions. So if you could just pop in the chat your country and the team that you work on to address a TD approach. So I would like to pass on the floor to Mizimi and Sarah to give their presentation. So 15 minutes for your presentation, please, Sarah and Mizimi.
Great, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. We're pleased to be here. Let me move this so we can see the full screen. Today, my name is Sarah Swizer. I'm the Director of Programs at START International, and Mizimi will be joining as well, a program specialist at START International. Will be doing a dual presentation to share different experiences and really provide a snapshot of the Fractal program, the Future Resilience for African Cities and Lands initiative. Okay, so as I said, it's the Future Resilience for African Climate, Cities, and Land. This was a project that had a span of a geographic scope over 8 different cities in Southern Africa and had a variety of partners that worked on this project. It was initiated in June of 2015, and it was a 4-year project with a funding extension that went into mid-2021. It was coordinated by the Climate Systems Analysis Group out of University of Cape Town, and it was part of the Future Climate for Africa initiative program that was jointly funded by the UK's Development for International Development and the Natural Environment Research Council. So I just want to provide a few slides to get us kind of immersed of the project topic and what this group was beginning to grapple with. So the aim of this project was to advance knowledge about climate change relevant to Southern African cities and to enhance the integration of this knowledge into medium to long-term decision-making associated with each one of those cities. So from the onset of proposal writing, it was very clear with grappling with this problem that a transdisciplinary approach was going to be necessary to address these complex issues. With that in mind, from the beginning of proposal writing, as well as the initial kickoff meetings, as the researchers and stakeholders began to work on this project, from the very beginning, learning was a key aspect that was really discussed and went through iterations of what that meant to the team as a whole. So the idea of inclusive, participatory, as well as reflexive learning processes to address climate change resilience was one of the key components that the project looked at as far as kind of a general approach of how the team handled moving forward with research in this regard. Just thinking through kind of the team participants that were involved, one of the quotes throughout the experience is one of the team members really, the learning approach was key to them. And so what really made an impression was this approach of learning how to learn. So constantly the team was rethinking the process of what learning really means, the definition of learning, and how as a team coming from different geographic regions and different disciplines, that the team had different understandings and as a whole reshaped their understanding of learning together. So speaking more about the learning approach, it was a collaborative project with the aim to co-create, specifically looking at entry points for climate change information into that decision and planning process that happens at the city level within these countries. It was discussed repeatedly, this project over the 5-year time frame really constantly went back to a few concepts, one of them being the need to embrace this idea of humble science. And receptivity was a key one as well. There was key learning and working groups that were specifically documented to capturing the learning processes within Fractal as well, looking at different scales from the city, the project level, as well as the whole community of Fractal itself, to figure out how to drive the process of learning and how to develop a framework that would really enhance and foster the transdisciplinary research that this group was beginning to tackle. What else? Yeah, I think I'll just add that as well within that, it was a very iterative and emergent learning process that was constantly changing. Now, Mazimi, if you're able to share, the next set of this presentation is going to dive into a few key examples of approaches and methods that were specifically used to help pursue the transdisciplinary research nature of this project.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And yes, I'm going to zero in on 2 methods or approaches that were used to engage as well as to bring together the very diverse stakeholders in the various cities, those 8 cities that Sarah referred to. And I'm excited to see that in the audience today, we do have Sean, who was quite central on the city side in the city of Durban. So the first approach or method of engagement were these city learning labs. And these were introduced to ensure that there was a sound method around the co-production process. And because of that diverse set of stakeholders, it was a process and a way to integrate how to co-explore the climate information or knowledge. As Sarah said, the aim of the project was really to come together and be able to explore how to have relevant climate information that would be usable in decision-making processes in these cities. And because of the diversity presented from the stakeholders coming from different backgrounds, different disciplines, different forms of knowledge, it was necessary to use this learning lab approach in order to come together and begin to explore the challenges that were identified in the cities. So it was really sort of like a deep dive to not only explore, but to unpack the issues. So the way it was done, or the way the learning labs were designed and co-designed, not just by one particular set of knowledge bearers, was first to identify the issues and then to also rank them. And then again, as I said, to co-explore them because of the complexity and the cross-cutting nature of these issues that emerged. Again, as Sarah pointed out, that it was an iterative process of constantly learning. And so there was this need to have space to be reflective, but to also be flexible in the way that these processes and the learning labs were done. And again, in that, there was a lot of co-production, not only of solutions, but in some of the tools that were used, the trainings, the capacity building and development, and so many other products that spoke to these issues. But the next set of engagement I want to talk about in the next slide involved what we called the embedded researcher model or method. And embedded researchers were contracted in each of those cities. And these were early career researchers who were mainly contracted from the university, but these could be coming from the university and then they were embedded, or in another form of the phrase, they were sort of like interns on the other side, because remember these, the main drivers, or should I say, partners in these cities were local governments and universities. So the idea of the embedded researcher was that they could be embedded in the other organization, and they were sort of like the bridge between the two main partners in these cities. And they were very integral. They were the ones who, the four leaders in terms of bringing stakeholders together, understanding the different partners and stakeholders and mapping them, and also to ensure that they, in that process, they also had a lot of capacity development done at personal level, in their careers, in their growth, and also just in learning the transdisciplinary approach. So we have there some of the costs coming from the embedded researchers. The first one was from Windhoek, and now, yes, so this is Cornelia from Windhoek, and she says, as an embedded researcher, she was coming from a scientific background, but the TD research she was involved in helped her to learn from all disciplines, such as the local urban governance and social science. And then in the next slide is Lulu Van Rooyen, and on her left side is actually Sean. So she, the quote from Lulu, who was in Durban, she was coming from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She was then embedded within the city or municipality of Durban, eThekwini. And she said, being an embedded researcher demanded tenacity, initiative, perseverance, and all those precious things. So there was a lot of capacity building, but also just an appreciation of the different stakeholders, but also the different forms of knowledge that would come to the table, and how to design the processes such as learning labs, such that those different forms of knowledge were were represented well, but that also there was a lot of voice equity, and that no form of knowledge was superior to another. So it was quite a complex process. But again, as Sarah said, there was a lot of learning from our side. So we can go to the next slide as I conclude. I just want to give an example as an outcome that came out of these learning processes, the transdisciplinary processes, but it's from the city of Harare. So the city of Harare was engaged in the Fractal project since 2016, and a lot of issues were co-identified and explored. But one of the emerging issues that came out was how there were so many different pieces of legislation and policy that had to do with managing environment and particularly water in the city. And so with the complexity that comes with climate change, the processes in Harare that involved Fractal, the huge recommendation was to try and bring together these different processes, these different units. And so the recommendation was for the local government, the city council, to have a climate desk. And so this was taken forward, and there were 2 or 3 learning labs within Harare that were then dedicated to assisting in terms of structuring the climate desk, making sure that others came together, particularly from the local government, to understand what the climate desk was about, but to also, in that togetherness, in that transdisciplinary approach, to also give input in how it would work. So it was about sensitization of the principles to do with the local government, and then making sure that the relevant departments in the city and the different stakeholders not only understood what the climate desk was about, but they also made input. And so in that manner, there was a lot of buy-in. So what we then did is that each of the departments from the Harare local government then had a focal person. And so this was the approach that was taken. And so it kind of integrated and coordinated issues to do with environmental management and climate. And so there was that streamlining that worked very well. And then in the last slide, you find that the climate desk in Harare, which has been put together for over a year now, has really improved the collaboration. And now it's very easy to work on targets, it's easy to approach the local council in terms of environmental management, climate, resilience, and all these related issues. But not only at that particular level at local governance, but even at the different tiers, even at national level in terms of coordination, a lot of the national processes to do with environmental management, climate and climate change, it's very easy now to collaborate with the city, to plan with the city, to deliver better and have deliverables. They've actually set a lot of targets and worked on a forward thinking and forward planning around these developmental issues. And they have contracts within the city that are performance-based. They have also now dedicated budgets towards some of the work, and a lot of these came out of the recommendations from Fractal. And what's exciting is that this is against a background in Harare where it was mostly reactionary. So the forward thinking has come through, and a lot of the learning that came out. So one of the things, as I conclude, that has come out as an output from the climate desk is actually a mapping of wetlands, because there was a sticky issue in the city to do with water and water management and flooding and so forth, and the zonation, and also the protection of these wetlands. So due to time, I'll stop here. Sarah, you can put, I think, the next slide, but we've talked about all these issues. This slide just talks about all the lessons that have come out, but I've mentioned the cross-cutting issues. I've also mentioned, carrying forward, and I see Sean, they also put a comment that we are carrying the legacy and we continue to work with such cities such as Harare in Durban, just leveraging on the work that was done in Fractal, and particularly the transdisciplinary process. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to the moderator as we stop here.
Thank you so much, Mizimi and Sarah. And fortunately, we'll have some more time to discuss the challenges and opportunities of each project, because I'd love to hear a little bit more about this last slide. One sentence that you said just struck me, really, it made me think. It's not just about exploring, but unpacking the issues to address different perspectives. So this is a quite interesting mode of seeing the TD approach, to recognize that it's harder. You have to open it a little bit wider so you can fit in these different perspectives. So thank you so much for the presentation and the insights. Next, we move on to Marshall Valentine, who will present her work with Jawik and the Jamaican Women in Coffee.
Good morning, all. Are we all seeing my screen? Awesome.
Yes, perfectly.
All right. Good morning again, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today, I just want to share very quickly how the Jamaican Women in Coffee has applied transdisciplinarity to our work. And here I've titled our presentation, Uplifting Women in the Jamaican Coffee Industry through Application of Transdisciplinarity. A little bit about the Jamaican Women in Coffee. We are a chapter of the International Women's Coffee Alliance, Jamaica. Since 2019, we are a registered charity, and our mission is to just connect women in the coffee industry to recognize their contribution overall and to empower a sustainable and equitable future for them. We are working through this by developing and nurturing a supportive community and using collaboration and a collective strength to improve change within the coffee industry as it is needed at this time. We offer for our members a vehicle for channeling resources to affiliated coffee communities, both locally and globally. We offer a meeting point for women to network and share their experiences and deliberate over issues. And then we also have a platform for women to develop their leadership and entrepreneurial skills. And you'll see how we do that when we go further down. And then eventually we're planning to develop a channel for women to market their own coffees, as that is very difficult in the Jamaican coffee space. So our team is led by active women in the Jamaican coffee industry. And according to JACRA, women form at least 25% of registered farmers in the Blue Mountain region. There's not much information on the High Mountain region because that area has reduced production over the last couple of years. So we are not so certain as to how many women there are in the High Mountain region at this point in time actively. And that's something that we're also working to find out through our field survey initiative. So as you can see here, our board consists of members from multiple different backgrounds who have committed to our purpose of driving the women in our industry. We have coffee distributors, we have geologists, we have lecturers, consultants in climate change and adaptation, we have digital transformation strategists, we have social development, and also quality and food safety and environmental management professionals. And farmers are also included in our board. Just to note that this board was newly elected, and our past board also included farmers, marketers, and persons within the coffee industry and in sustainability. And we intentionally decided to select our team because we wanted diverse backgrounds to help to guide our processes. Because we're a charitable organization, it's very difficult to get expertise without funding. So we try to ensure that our expertise within was able to help to guide us for our initial stages. Now, our initial board coined 5 key initiatives that we saw that would tackle the challenges that I'll just lay out a few of them in the Jamaican coffee industry. We have the field survey initiative that will seek to identify these women, know who they are, what their needs are. We have the quality control initiative, which will seek to improve the quality of the coffee. And then we have market access to increase access to the markets once we have better quality coffee. Then we have our sustainability initiatives, which will improve the livelihoods through sustainable farming practices. And then we have leadership initiative, which will build leaders within the community so the women have more confidence in going out there and having a word in policy. Now, it will be too much for me to go through the detail in all these initiatives, so we'll just go to our first initiative in which our first impact project was developed. So our field survey initiative was developed based on a problem that Jamaican women in coffee are underserved due to lack of accurate demographic data. And then our solution was to develop an extensive field survey, which was powered by Salesforce, to learn exactly how we are serving the women and how we can help them, and then set benchmarks for quantifiable results. Now, we initially intended on doing 300 to 400 women in the industry. However, funding prevented that. So we decided to do a pilot survey, and we'll go to that in a few. Now, the main industry challenges that we had that coined us trying to push forward to do this pilot survey was that we saw that there were inequalities within the industry with regards to male and female coffee farmers in terms of the amount they got paid, the assistance they got, how well they were able to source the labor for their farms, the voice they had in policy. There was a lot of inequality there. We saw that there was a reduction in the quality and quantity of the coffee, not just from the women farmers, but from Jamaica Blue Mountain in general. And then there was a reduced in the quality of life due to insufficient income from their coffee because the price of the coffee has been dropping significantly over the past few years. Now, we decided to come together as an Ascent organization to develop these programs. And to be honest, none of us have never been engaged in fundraising. It's our first charitable organization. We're very new to this. So we found it very important to find partnerships for persons to guide us through this initiative. And here we had collaboration with different entities who offered us mentorship. We had the Leap Company, we had Entrepreneurs Across Borders who offered us mentorship, also got some initial funding from UN Women to explore the international coffee space. We have support from a Salesforce consultancy in Jamaica. And then we have our ongoing support from IWCA Global, and we are still in contact with and continue to collaborate with these agencies. And of importance, we partnered with the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority because they are the regulators for coffee within the industry. So it was very important for us to partner with them and to continue with them because they can give us the information we need on farmers and also provide support if we need it in the field. Now, some of our challenges that we faced, we have a desire to understand the need of all the women in industry. However, we've been able to acquire this funding for the baseline study because most funding agencies now require tangible outputs and value-added products. And we have been having difficulty funding the extended field survey. And that is because many people did not fully understand the challenges that the women face because there has been no study of this type before. So there was no baseline to say this is why we need to do this study because the information does not exist within Jamaica. We were the first to do this study in Jamaica. And then the regulatory body, JACRA, has, and they still do have conflicted views towards the root causes of the inequalities that exist within the industry. And that is also because no real study has been done. There has been no collaboration with the farmers on what the reason for these issues are. Now, we decided to execute a pilot survey, and this was self-funded. and we met with about 67 women within the industry across the Blue Mountain regions. And we sought to identify the challenges they faced, because that was the only way we could give them something that they really needed. What was the support that you needed? What was the area of intervention that we needed to come in on? Throughout the survey, women, they basically validated what we had as the challenges. They continuously requested the need for resources, information through training, and improvement in the quality of their coffee in order to receive higher prices. So it confirmed what we initially thought was the issues existing within the industry. And as you can see here, we went into the field, we engaged with these women, we built trust with them. That was very important for us. We wanted them to trust us, because within the Jamaican coffee space, the farmers have been shafted many times through cooperatives, through groups, and we realized there was a lot of distrust within the industry. But we decided to just let them realize that, hey, we're here to serve you. Just tell us what we want and we'll see how best we can help. And we ensured that we included them in the planning process. We created community leaders to help us to find other women. And then this led to our field survey report, which gave us some startling information. I won't spend too much time on this, but just to note that on average, the women that we interviewed had about 2.5 acres in coffee. And on those 2.5 acres, women were producing about 40 boxes of coffee. And in Jamaica, 40 boxes is about 60 pounds. And based on the price that they're getting for that, 2.5 acres, based on the amount that they're outputting, is very minimal, right? And they have seen a decrease in the production over the last few years. So those issues were very startling. Additionally, we had a case where 52% of the women only had secondary level education, and the next 29, call it 30%, has primary level education. They indicated that their income from coffee is not sufficient, and that some of them have never even received training in coffee. It was just learning from experience, from what their parents taught them, and then trial and error. Now, as I mentioned, we decided to write a proposal for a project. And this is the strengthening the capacity of women coffee farmers in the Jamaican coffee industry. Fortunately, this was funded by the Canadian Fund for Local Initiatives in 2021, based on the justification provided from the evidence collected in the pilot survey. And because we have different regions within the Blue Mountains, we decided to make this a 3-part project. And we first executed it in St. Thomas, then we'll execute it in St. Andrew, and then Portland, because there are different challenges existing within the different regions. And then the dynamics of the communities are very different. And we wanted to have the women receive optimal results from these initiatives that we're offering. We've also, for note, received another funding this year to execute phase 2 of the project in another region. Now, when we got funding for that project, we again went back out into the field. Before we designed the material, before we decided what we're going to give the farmers, we did another sensitization session. We got together the potential trainers and the industry experts, and we continued collaboration with the farmers to determine what they want to be trained in, and then what material and solutions they would need for productivity, what inputs would they need. And then we went ahead and then we developed training material based on information received from the farmers. What do you need? And that helped to build their confidence also and trust in JAWIC, because that co-production of knowledge is very important. We wanted to ensure that they had a voice in the development of their solutions. We designed interactive and demonstrative trainings. We were on the farms. These trainings were very practical and applicable to the challenges that the women face. We got experts in agronomy and sustainable coffee production, and they recommended vital farm tools and inputs that were needed for the coffee based on the area that we are in. And then we continue to promote networking among the women by involving the different communities to just express their different views and share their experiences with each other. And we ensure that JAWIC remain present throughout the entire project within the communities. Now, we had some very wonderful results. We had 35 women farmers engaged in 4 training workshops, which were practical and relatable. We had soil management, harvesting, pest and disease management, and sustainable farming practices. These women were very heavily engaged and participative in the trainings, and they shared their own experiences and knowledge with the group. And this we will use to improve the training material for the next group of training. We had in-field demonstrations where the agronomists shared their practices and knowledge. We had areas where the agronomists asked the farmers questions, and they basically linked science to the practices shared by the farmers to say, this is why you're doing this, or this is why this works for you. And the farmers really appreciated that. We have 2 women in JAWIC from that community who operate as leaders. They are the liaison of the group. They are the ones who will contact the farmers within the community. They are the ones who will attend events. And we had a woman who she attended a meet and greet session with the Canadian Fund for Local Initiatives from that community, and that was very, very uplifting for her as she shared. We had a video storytelling activity, and then we developed a record keeping booklet for the farmers. We issued care packages with seedlings, spray pans. We also issued fertilizer for the women, which they needed. And we also issued certificates of participation to boost the morale of the women. And then we have women now in the community who are now even hosting international research students who are assisting them with their farms and sharing and transferring knowledge. We have also went ahead and designed a monitoring and evaluation survey, which will be implemented next month. We will go back to the community, and then we'll find out what is the impact of the project that was implemented, we're assessing the farmers' knowledge, attitude, and perception of that project that was implemented, and how they value the assistance given, so we can again improve as we go forward and ensure that we show them that they were included in the process and that their input is valuable. And to wrap up, we are paving the way forward for the coffee industry. We are continuing to employ these TD principles to all our activities. We have received additional funding, or we are in the process of receiving additional funding for a larger scale project to replicate this and the research across the Blue Mountain region on a project we've coined Higher Ground, that's in partnership with the Coffee Quality Institute in the US. We have a baseline which to work with from the previous board to the new board that will allow for more innovation and development of our strategic objectives, and include the aim is to include farmers as part of our board going forward, allow them to have that voice, starting with the JAWIC. And then we are seeing now where the industry stakeholders are now recognizing the need to improve the infrastructure for knowledge transfer related to coffee production throughout the value chain, starting with the farmers, because of this information that we've acquired, because of how we have been out in the field. Farmers have been given the voice to speak. We have the information in the study. So the industry stakeholders, the regulatory bodies, they're realizing the need for this type of continuity of these programs. All right, so with that, I will wrap up. And we have a farmer there just saying peace. So thank you all for listening in.
Thank you so much, Marshally. One sentence that struck me as well from your presentation was like how the process of TD builds empowerment for the people involved in the project as well. So it's a process that goes both ends, right? So it improves the quality of the project itself, but it might also, if done in a way that's actually equitable, empower people to recognize their voice in specific arenas and places. So mainly when dealing with underrepresented people of some sort, like the women in the coffee industry, it's really important to recognize the other benefits of the TD approach as well. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So next we have Dr. Anne de Vernal from the University of Quebec. If you could please and share your presentation.
Yeah, hello, I will try to share my screen properly. Is it okay?
It's perfect, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for giving me this opportunity to share some information about the transdisciplinary project that is endorsed by the Belmont Forum that is called Niche Arctic, from Nunavik to Iceland, climate, human, and culture through time across the coastal, subarctic, North Atlantic. So we are moving away from the low latitude and the coffee industry, and we are going into the Arctic. And this project that started 2 years ago and will end next year is a transdisciplinary project really on culture, environment, interaction in response to climate change, with a focus on the subarctic region that are quite particular. So I was asked to prepare a presentation with 3 main topics to present what is our team, and I will present what is our focus and working area, to discuss what is our work, and I will give you some example, and I will also give some example of the output to the community of our work. So we are a transdisciplinary team that include 20 researchers, many students from 8 countries, some in geoscience, some in literature, some in archaeology, some in design. We all have the same focus: coastal environment, nearshore environment characterized by subarctic climate, which means that, and this map shows some peculiarities of the Arctic subarctic environment. The yellow line is a maximum extent of sea ice cover in winter. The whitish area is a concentration of sea ice. This environment, this coastal environment, are characterized by seasonal sea ice, seasonal to perennial sea ice, by very harsh climate, and also by generally poor knowledge of the condition over hundreds or 1,000 years, because of the low population density and very late arrival of human being, and very, very recent arrival of European that made instrumental records. So these areas are interesting by their own, because they are poorly known from an historical point of view. The project was built based on the experience of the different members of the group, and based on the working areas, the places where we are actually doing some field work and some sample collection. And these areas are illustrated here in purple: the Nunavik, the northern Quebec, occupied by Inuit. In green, the Labrador coast, where there are Inuit, but also some Innu, some Indian people. The Greenland coast that was occupied by Inuit, but also Norse people, and also Iceland. So these are our working areas, which are all characterized by harsh climate condition. So we are working with the same focus, understanding the climate, environment, human interaction, but from very different perspectives. And with this figure, I'm showing the study site for each of these regions. So these are blow up of the working areas, and in blue are the marine sediment cores we examine. My specialty is paleoceanography, so I'm looking at climate change from marine viewpoints. In the team, we have people that are looking at the terrestrial area. What are the vegetation change? How the environment is changing on land? And we have archaeologists who are looking at the human occupation. And so this figure gives you an idea of the broad scope of the project. Different perspective means also different archive, different way to, and different expertise, different way to look at the history of climate. So we are looking at marine cores. We are looking also at peat, time series. Time series from peat bogs, at archaeological remains that are illustrated here on that figure, or also at archives that are linked to the directly to human, which include pictorial art and literature. So our teamwork is transdisciplinary. But I must be honest, most of us are first disciplinary. The research, the individual research of each of us remains disciplinary, but we put together our knowledge to develop fruitful interaction, exchange, discussion, which lead to interdisciplinary knowledge, the interdisciplinary project to build new knowledge with the different expertise. So we are developing projects that are interdisciplinary, and within the group, there are younger fellows that are developing transdisciplinary approach, that are using the knowledge of the different disciplines to develop something new. And I will give you briefly example of the transdisciplinary activities before to provide examples of the output. So we have meetings. We all meet together with our different languages and and nomenclature, disciplinary nomenclature. And for example, we met 2 weeks ago, and we had 3-day meetings, very interesting, dealing with paleoclimate data, climate of the past, dealing with ecological record from a human archaeological point of view, and also paleoclimatic point of view. And we have a day about the cultural perception of climate in Greenland and Labrador. And this is really fascinating, outside of my own field, but really fascinating. We are developing, I was mentioning that bringing the knowledge and the expertise of all, we are developing a transdisciplinary project, and we have 2 projects that have been developed since 2 years, thanks to this Belmont Forum endeavor. We have a project that will specifically examine the history of the human occupation and climate change. You know, in that part of the world, in the Nordic areas, the human occupation is quite recent. The first migration of human took place not more than 4,500 years ago, and through the Bering Land Bridge in that area. And so the population spread, and they have been changing their culture a bit. And we are trying to understand the development of the population, the habit of the population, the livelihood of the population in relation with climate. And we have a project that was funded in the in Labrador, and it is called the Nunavut Coastal Interaction Project, dealing with climate, environment, and Inuit subsistence strategy. Because in those harsh environments, you may imagine that subsistence is not simple. And we have another project for which we received seed money to develop a more comprehensive project that is in Nunavik, where I will talk a little bit more about that, where the people, the Inuit people, would like to propose a UNESCO heritage site in the near future, and they ask us to help. So in both project, both thematic project, there was one central hypothesis, and this central hypothesis is that sea ice that is seasonal in a subarctic environment, and the productivity related to sea ice, it is a very particular, were determinant for pre-Inuit livelihood. So in that figure, you have an illustration of men doing some hunting on sea ice, and below you have a graph showing the time with the history of the human occupation with the culture, pre-Dorset culture, Dorset culture, the Thule Inuit culture, and there is a very important gap about 700 years ago with a very important change of culture, and the hypothesis, this is related to climate change and to a reorganization of the climate ocean system in that part of the world that made the productivity and the marine mammal, for example, population very different. So about the transdisciplinary team work, beyond the project that are underway, that have been developed, that are starting, there are some real, I think, integrative transdisciplinary studies I would like to mention. And one is from a postdoctoral student, a fellow, who has approached the concept of winter in Labrador, Nunavut, not based on geological archives, on marine coast or peat, but based on discursive source. So she has considered using the literature, all what that was written from the old time about Labrador, to extract information about climate and to transfer this knowledge to the scientists. So, and this is extremely interesting. So, Marie-Michelle Ouellette-Bernier, I'm referring to her work, was supervised by a researcher in literature and me, a geoscientist. So, and she produced a very marvelous a good monograph, an excellent monograph, and I just took an extract of it here in that figure. It is referencing a geologist who made some survey in the early 90s, and 1900, and one of the first things he noticed, and this is reported in his logbook, is that the vocabulary of Inuit to define months has nothing to do with our vocabulary. December is the ice-forming month with a very specific name, not January, and January is a cold month for frost. And this is something very interesting because we start the transdisciplinary work start with vocabulary that have nothing to do, and it is very important to be able to understand each other. And this is something that came out from the work of Marie-Michelle. By the way, snow, we know the word snow, that is white and that is nice, but for the Inuit people, there are 42 words to define snow, because snow can be very different depending upon climate condition. So I think this is this was a good example of transdisciplinary study. So now I would like to show briefly 3 examples of the output to the community in a very large sense. One of the example I would like to provide is comes from publication of historical and literacy perspective, which include poetry about the Arctic and the specificity of the North: sea ice, cold, remote, dark. You may imagine all those who are contrasted. And here are 3 examples of books that were published in within the past few months. One is dealing with the Norwegian literature about the Arctic, that provide a very different perspective, the perspective of the people concerning the climate in the Arctic. And this was translated from the Norwegian to French. The other book I would like to refer to is Darkness. This book was published. This book is available on PDF. As PDF, it is free. So it is really open to a very, very large public. And you will find extract there in Icelandic, in French, in English, and in many other languages. So this transdisciplinarity is also multilingual. And the third example I'm referring to, Note de terrain pour la toundra alpine, is in French. It is poetry that describe the Arctic processes. So this is an example of output to the community, because this is for the community and is publicly available. Another output is workshop, what deals with workshop and exchange with young people in schools about climate change in coastal subarctic environment. In the past year, some students of our group have developed some booklet workshop with some very simple explanation of climate change through time and with some exercise, and they are visiting school. And this booklet will be soon available for the teacher trainers. And it is quite interesting because it is a way to start a sort of a dialogue about climate with the young generation, which will experience very large climate change in their environment. And we are just starting now. Based on this, we are just starting a new project that was supported by the Research Fund of Quebec, and that is called Face to Face for Climate, dialogue about a hot topic that can give you chills. It is about warming, global warming, and the consequence of the global warming. And in that project, we the first step is to interview teenagers, to visit school and to exchange with the young, and to and this is approximately done. We have close to 200 results of interview with teenagers. And from this, we will identify what are the critical topics for them, for the young fellow. And when we will have identified the critical topic by the end of the summer, we will start preparing answers as triptych with the answer from scientists, so the facts, what is the reality to answer the question, with communicator for the large audience, and with artists to see what is a perception. And with that triptychs, we plan to have an itinerary exposition in the forthcoming year. So the last example I would like to mention is for which we have started to work, is the development of a future UNESCO World Heritage Site. In the northern Nunavik, there are very unique petroglyphs, and here is an illustration of petroglyphs, so figures that were made by thousands of years ago by population, and the community, the modern Inuit community, would like to valorize their culture, their history, and they would like to propose the High Artic site as a UNESCO heritage site. And to prepare the proposal, they need the context, a climatic context, and they have asked us to help them to prepare that paleoclimate, paleoenvironmental context to explain in which types of condition the human occupied the regions, the area. So, and this is a joint venture with the people from the Artic Cultural Institute, mandated by the communities. So I will finish with that. This is another overview of our project, showing the places where are the researchers, red dots, and the working area, and the logos of the institutes involved, the academic and non-academic institute involved in the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for this really, really interesting. And I echo the comments on the chat box about how interesting it is to take an overview of the TD approach applied to such different territorial contexts. And it really struck me in your presentation also the importance of local categories to understand the local perspective, right? So when scientists that are trying to apply a TD project come with a too fixed set of categories to look at the world and do not relate to the ones that are already present in the people that live in that environment, it's really hard to open the issues in a way that's really possible to encompass these diverse perspectives. So thank you so much for the showing how the local community looks at the time passing throughout the year. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. So at this point, I'd like to open the floor to the participants to have direct questions to each of the presenters or to all of them, as you wish. I have loads of questions in my mind, but I really like to give the opportunity for those that could come to this session so they can address directly our participants.
I think while everyone collects their thoughts, Lila, why don't you start with one of the present questions, because I can almost feel them coming out of you.
Yeah, so, well, yeah, one question that was running through my mind while I was taking a look at all the presentations was about, on one hand, the idea of different funding mechanisms and how they can relate to specific aspects of the TD approach. So in each of the presentations, you could see that the projects had the specific aspects that they could cover really well due to the funding mechanism that was behind the whole process, and the other ones that it was a little bit more difficult to relate to. So I was wondering if all three of you, all four of you actually, could comment a little bit on the challenges and opportunities that were found throughout your projects due to funding possibilities and also contingencies. If we could start the other way around, start with them and end up with Mizimi and Sarah.
Thanks for that important question. So, of course, Fractal was a project that emanated out of a proposal. And so, you know, there were limitations in terms of some of the issues or the focus that we could look at. But we were very fortunate. I mean, transdisciplinary processes take time, they take effort, and they definitely need funding and a bit of consistency in those three things. But we were fortunate that in a lot of the cities, they had 4, 5, 6 years working on the same projects with the same kind of stakeholders and partners. So that helped in terms of sustainability and continuity. And so that's why we're talking about legacy processes. But I just want to also say that we also managed to have a little bit of a pushback in terms of making sure that we could be flexible and, you know, taking time to explain that to our funding partners, but also having this as one of the outcomes to push that flexibility, because as we were saying, there were so many things that we learned and we could have done and we could do better. So, but it has also opened up opportunities to continue the work. And there were lots of interests generated along the way, which has also helped kind of bringing in on board more people to work on those processes and to continue the work. Thank you.
I would just add onto Mazimi's remarks, the Future Climate for Africa program. I think once we got started and they saw how keen people were to have transdisciplinary case studies, that they really reoriented and let the group focus on learning quite substantially. So Fractal has several outputs and podcasts and series that are centrally located around the learning that took place within the research community of Fractal. Which would be something that we could share in the SRI chat box for people to check out as resources.
Thank you. Marshall, please.
Sure. So just to point out, one of the main things for us, because we were an ascent organization, as I mentioned earlier, we were all new to fundraising and rural community development. I think myself and Anne were probably myself, Anne, and Janelle, who's another PhD student, were the only 3 board members that have had interactions with the community. And when we started writing projects, it was, I think the issue for us receiving funds was the fact that this baseline study has never been done. So funders were uncertain as to how it would impact the community. So there was hesitancy in relation to how the funds would be used. So we constantly got pushback with our proposals on how it would impact. So we needed to continue to improve our internal proposal writing skills and also include, because I think it's safe to say, I think Anne is also here. Hi, Anne. She's our vice president. I think it's safe to say that we also had no idea how to write TD into our projects. I think once we learned how to do that and provide justifications, it made it a lot easier. And that's why it was so important for us to get all the information from the community. That was why it was important for us to do that baseline study, because at least now we have that information to write our projects with. And with our first impact project, we're realizing now that more agencies are interested in funding our initiatives. They're seeing that there's impact. They're seeing that, you know, there are opportunities there for improvement in the livelihoods of these women. But I think the initial challenge for us was understanding how to write the approach into our projects. And also the second thing was the industry not understanding what the outputs would be, because there has been no study of that sort and of that magnitude within the Jamaican coffee industry space before.
Thank you so much. Anne? So just before Anne, I don't know if Anne Teresa, that's also here, she's also here, she would like to comment on that as well.
So you would like to know about the funding path?
Yes. What kinds of constraints and possibilities your project had due to the funding mechanisms that supported it?
There are special calls for transdisciplinary research that fosters us to go toward transdisciplinarity. because this is not something that is natural in science. In natural science, we are very busy by maintaining the lab and trying to find the fund to do our basic research. So without specific funds for doing transdisciplinarity, this would be impossible. Almost impossible. And I must say that in the thanks to the Belmont Forum, this is one of those initiatives that really opens the opportunity for seeking funds to start project and transdisciplinary project. But in Canada and mostly in the Quebec province, there are a specific envelope of money for transdisciplinarity and for communication across the different disciplines. And I think this is this comes from the top, but I think it is fruitful. In our case, at least. Maybe Natasha would have something to add about that point. Natasha is the coordinator of, she's here, of Niche Artic.
Hi,
Please,
everyone.
Natasha.
Yeah, hi, everyone. No, I think I'm agree with Anne, and she made the round of the question. It's quite a bit difficult to get some funding from transdisciplinary or just to increase the output for community, and but we try to do our best to just increase that and make it more relevant for community, because community don't just want to see science in comic and living, they want to have more information about the following of the project. So this part, it's quite hard to focus on.
So the colonialist approach is over. we are responding to the need of the communities. This is what we try to do.
Marshali, did you want to comment something else before I pass on the word to Fanny?
Yes, so I was about to say that it's very difficult. I think Natasha mentioned something similar. It's very difficult for funders to sometimes see the value of some of the intentions of our projects. So getting that baseline data, transfer of knowledge. We wrote a project that was strictly knowledge-based, just capacity building. That was the Higher Ground project. And the funding agency basically came back to us and say, hey, we need you to give them things. give them chemicals, give them fertilizer, give them something. We need tangible results. We don't think the knowledge transfer is important, but we're saying, hey, that's the root of the issue. We've realized based on our study that is the root of our issue in the industry. We've spoken to the farmers, we've spoken to the industry players, and this is the main issue. Why would we spend millions on buying fertilizer if the farmer does not know how to use it? So that's some conflict that we constantly have. I mean, we needed the funding, and we've tried to work our way around how we could do that without taken away from the capacity building. So we kind of rewrote the project to include us giving them something, because I guess the agency needs, when the project wraps up, they need to take some pictures to say, hey, we gave the farmers this. And that is a big challenge that we have. They need to see tangible things. And from our objective is to uplift the industry through building that knowledge, having the farmers know so they can execute. So that was something that I think I needed to point out.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and the tangible stuff cannot be a certificate, right?
Exactly.
So I'd like to pass the word first to Fanny Ramos-Quispe and then to Pauline. Fanny, please.
Thank you, Laila. Oh, maybe Andres wanted to talk before. I think.
Oh, she just said that materials coupled with knowledge to please funders. Yeah, she's basically saying what I said. They need.
All right.
they need
Yeah,
materials.
exactly as Marshall was saying. Another thing I'll just add, I'm sorry I don't have video right now, but just to add that with the pilot study, it was actually self-funded, right? Because at the time we couldn't get funding from, you know, other grant agencies. So we saw the value, we saw the need. So we actually put up our own funding, go into our own pockets to self-finance this project. And it was from that pilot study, you know, that we could use the results from those pilot study to really venture off into applying for the CFLI grant and for it to become the success that it was.
Thank you so much, and Teresa.
Okay,
Fanny?
thank you, Laila. And thank you all the speakers, because your projects and your examples are just very interesting. So many ideas came to my mind while you were talking. And while thinking about transdisciplinary science and your experiences on co-production of documents, I had this question, or I was wondering, how do you think, and what do you think, and how did you deal with the production of different types of documents? Because I think in some countries, including mine especially, there is a difference between scientific documents and other literature, right? And mainly the documents that are produced by NGOs, organizations, whichever are not universities, are not really considered as scientific literature, are something else, gray or whatever name society want to give them. So in this way of building transdisciplinary science, how are you dealing with that? Or did you have some constraints about using or producing different types of documents while, for example, Marshali, you were producing these great guides with women, and you use also those guidelines for them to continue these trainings? Did you have any limitation with funding or other organizations to see these documents as scientific as well? Yeah, I would like to hear your comments and all of you. Thank you.
So I can go first. So that's a very important question, very interesting question too, because it's something I struggled with in us designing the training material, because the idea is for us to have a repository of information for the farmers. However, we need that information, yes, to be applicable to what they're doing, but to also have some scientific basis. What we did when we were developing the training material, so firstly, the presentations, we requested the agronomists themselves and the coffee industry stakeholders, who the soil quality professional who did that presentation, he worked with Jamaica's largest fertilizer company. So he's a scientist and a professional in his area. So we asked him to design that material, then we reviewed it internally. What we got from the farmers, what information specifically they'd like, and then we asked them to design material based on that. For the harvesting and pest management, luckily for us, the individual who delivered that training used to be an employee at JACRA, the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority. They are the regulators for coffee in Jamaica. And they have a booklet which they've published, and it's very public. So we were able to pull information from that, of course, with reference to them, to deliver that information to the farmers. And of course, we also relied on, for that record keeping book, I'm a quality management systems consultant by profession. So I design procedures, instructions, forms, all of that. So I used my expertise to pull information from other reputable sources to put in that icon booklet, along with the information from the experts. Now, while that booklet may not be published booklet, it was applicable for the purpose that we wanted it to. It replicated in summary the information that we needed to deliver to the farmers in summary, plus we created a method for them to document how much fertilizer they're using, how much chemicals they're using, where, what season they're cleaning their, like how much are they doing crop care, soil care. So it's just us making sure that the information that we put out there is not too technical, but applicable. But I guess going forward, the challenge would be to ensure that if we put our stamp on something, we'll have to just ensure that that's valid information going to the farmers. And we wanted to ensure that that is what we did for our first project. So we ensure that we pulled all our expertise together to make sure that that information is in fact valid information for them to use. And so again, we didn't really get additional funding for that, or we just ensure that we pull all our resources together just to make sure that they get value for the funding money.
Thank you so much, Marshali. Sarah, Zimi, or Anne, do you want to comment on that?
I may comment on the publication if you wish. As researcher, we have to publish in the peer-reviewed journal. This is clear, but if we want to establish dialogue with the people, we have to publish things that the people will understand. So I think that all sorts of publications are valid. And for example, in our group, they are trying to make comics to explain climate change. And so in order to reach the young people, the teenager, and these are parts of the community. So I think that everything is important. Now I am spoiled. I have the chance to be in Canada, in Quebec, where we have research center that understands the importance of it. And when we are ready to publish the comic books that we are preparing with students, we will go to the university, to my research center, to several places to find the money to make the publication. So I know that, but I think it is important to diversify the way to communicate the information.
Thank you. Zimi?
Yes, so in Fractal, we had about 30 partners, because in each of those cities, there was a local government partner and a university partner, and then those that were external or even internal partners in those cities. And that diversity then gave us different target groups. So researchers and academics were able to work on academic outputs such as, research papers and so forth. And there was an appetite for it because we also had students and early career researchers and, working on their theses and things like that. But then we also had the different types of stakeholders and knowledge bearers. And you'll find that we really tried to be creative with the Red Cross Crescent, for example, and they led us very well in things like facilitation tools, looking at drama and creative arts. There was a youth group in the city of Lusaka, for example, and they demonstrated or talked about their perspectives using drama and art and so forth and so on. And then we had other stakeholders like ICLI, who developed these Talanoa dialogues and infographics. And then we had the Stockholm Environmental Institute, for example. They developed tools around transformative leadership, around how to rank issues, for example. And I think what it then did is it put a lot of us on the spot to develop in communication skills, and also developing these communication products outside of our traditional products that we knew. So for example, there was a lot of demand on the PIs to work on online articles. They were coming from the research fraternity, and it was something new but it developed all of us capacities, short videos, pictures and so forth. And Sarah and I, of course, have shared the links and all of us are all of you are welcome to look at some of those outputs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a quick reflection of thinking of the initial question that you asked about funding mechanisms and what structures are in place and conflict or obstacles that could be arise from that, as well as thinking about this question about publications and different ways that things need to be produced. I think it's very front and center of transdisciplinary methods and research that is conducted, but everyone that is involved and wants to be involved, I think soon, really grapples with the fact that you have to be ready to be uncomfortable. That's kind of at some point during the situation of interacting in a transdisciplinary process that you may be vulnerable, or that you may be in a setting where you're talking about something and sharing experiences that you really feel like you know nothing about. So one of, just to add on to Mazimi's comments, SEI, one of our partners, they created a game called Spill the Beans that was really about trying to create a dialogue where people felt comfortable to share and to come to the table. And it was around various ways of understanding resilience. So climate resilience in the context of these 8 different cities in Southern Africa. But really being able to interrogate and share different ways of understanding the concept of resilience. And so as a result of being able to break down some of those conversations, thinking about the different types of products and publications that are produced, SEI then developed kind of a one-pager that outlines how you might be able to take that game into a different context and apply it into a different TD research setting. So there's several products that were developed too that speak to kind of these, various names, but whether you're a coordinator in a TD project or you're sitting in that kind of boundary space of trying to glue all of these different researchers and stakeholders and that have very diverse perspectives and maybe different roles within the project, but just kind of key products that fit different needs as well.
Thank you, Sarah. So please, Pauline, you wanted to make a question to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you for all the presenters. I really enjoyed this session, quite diverse and quite transdisciplinary. My question is really for Marshall. So you mentioned that you targeted these women because I guess you realized that they are disadvantaged compared to their male counterparts. But I also assume that the male counterparts have some things that are working, that they are doing. What models have you put in place to make sure that there's cross-learning from the aspects that the male counterparts are doing so that the females can also do that for them to be successful, taking into consideration the barriers that you identified during the pilot survey?
A good question.
Thank you, Pauline. So after you, Marshall, maybe Anne-Teresa can make a comment as well, because she had her hand raised.
Yes,
she can
sure.
comment on both.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Very important and interesting question. So even though we are Jamaican women in coffee, we've we've made it clear that, we are representing the women in the coffee industry. However, we have not neglected the fact that the men exist there and that there are some practices that we need to transfer. So the issues that we're having with the inequality between men and women is not necessarily because the men are doing anything different. It's just that they're seen more as the powerhouses within the coffee space. It's a male-dominated industry. So we have many of these women, their husbands are also coffee farmers, right? So what we've encouraged is that when you learn from us, you go back and transfer that knowledge. And we've had instances where men have asked, can we also be a part of your organization? And we said, yes, you can be. However, of course, women will get preference. So we are not really turning anyone back. We're ensuring that the information that we acquire is of best practices pulled from, as you mentioned, what the male counterparts are doing differently. There are some things that the women, for example, our terrain is treacherous. So for the average woman, like I always use my hand as an example, like this is the hillside in Jamaica for coffee. So you literally have people planting coffee on this slope. So imagine a woman with a child, you know, going up that slope. And trust me, I've seen women with their children harvesting coffee, and those little children are there. So they don't have enough time to pay attention to detail as much as the man does, because she has more household responsibilities. So it's challenges that we've identified. The crop care, the harvesting, some of those, they are across the industry for both men and women. However, we're trying to focus on the women because they are the ones who are underrepresented. When the coffee industry or Jackra at this moment go into the field, they're mostly going to the male farmers. We've had women who said they've never seen the regulators at their farm any at all. So they are underrepresented. So we are trying to represent them in a way they've never been represented. And we are also opening up our knowledge distribution to the male counterparts, because the men are sometimes who help us to, you know, lift those fertilizer bags. I've had a farmer, assist me with driving up those hills. I've never met him before. My car was stuck and he had to come in my car, drive me to the location. All right, so we do have men helping us throughout, and we are not saying that we're not a male-centered organization. We're just focusing heavily on the women, but we do that knowledge transfer where necessary. So the infrastructure we have in place is just to encourage the women to transfer that knowledge to their male counterparts, and also looking where there are the malpractices that the practices that the men are implemented that women aren't. If there's any way we can improve that so the women can implement, then we try to implement those practices in a creative way so that they can do better.
Thank you. And Teresa, did you
Yeah,
want to comment on it?
I was gonna support just what Marshall is, compliment what Marshall is saying. Initially I had my hand raised about Fanny's question with the publications. I completely agree with Anne, the other Anne, where all publications, in my opinion, are very, very valid. And for JAWIC, or pilot survey, you know, that is really a technical report, right? And that report was actually given to one of the ministers in the industry, agriculture minister in the industry, because generally these sectors, they generally focus on the technical reports, right? Not the heavily jargon academic papers, which do have their place, definitely. And that is why for our upcoming research, where we are hoping that we can get funding to do a industry-wide baseline research that is scientifically robust, because we want to do both a technical report for our policymakers, as well as you know, the academic peer-reviewed journal published you know, scientific papers. So, you know, there has to be a balance. Not everything can be completely academic, because you have to cater to a wider community, a wider audience. We have to cater to our farmers. We have to cater to policymakers. We have to cater, you know, to the academics who may be interested in doing more research within the area. And currently, there's no gender gap research in the area. There's no gender analysis being done within Jamaica's coffee industry. So that is a gap that JAWIC wants to fill, but it does take funding, and that's what we're working on to do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aunt Teresa. So at this point, I would pass on to the last part of our workshop here. And I really like to seize the opportunity of having this wonderful audience and these wonderful panelists together here. So many people experienced in TD practice and research, working on different issues on water, food security, climate change, fisheries, TD in general, education, climate and health. So I'd really like to seize this opportunity to gather the information and the experiences of all those people. So you're all invited to go to the Jamboard in the link that I just put in the chat and provide any insights on the questions that are there. I'm going to share my screen so we can also take a look of what comes out of it while we populate it. So our panelists are also really invited to contribute as you see fit. So I think most of you are probably familiar with Jamboards as well, but the most popular functions of it are this one, the sticky notes. So just click here and add a sticky note to whatever you want to say, or you can also add an image or a photograph. You can Google it, upload it from your computer to recognize something that you might imagine can relate to the question. So the first idea here would be, so you're seeing the second slide, but what are the common sources of conflict or controversy in TD projects? So in your experience, what were the main challenges of trying to apply TD? So I could offer some examples, but I'd love to see what comes up with the audience and we can comment a little bit on it. I can't write anything because otherwise we'll see that I am writing it. So these are already three really interesting topics for our conversation. So as we addressed a little bit the idea of equity in budgets among different partners or different funding priorities, would the person that shared the idea of miscommunication between different stakeholder groups would care to comment a little bit how this miscommunication occurs and why?
That was me. And I think, you know, what I have experienced or at least seen definitely happen is that there's just not the same language. And I don't mean the same language as in English or French or Spanish or any of those pieces, although definitely that can be part of the challenge, which actually a few people on this call will have heard me complain about before too, because I do think being able to speak between languages is important, but also just even within the groups that are doing the research, understanding and creating a shared language around what we're trying to achieve. Different words mean different things in different contexts with different, you know, even between different countries or even within the same community, but between different types of stakeholders. And so making sure that you set the groundwork and you create that space for common communication, I think is super important. It's very easy for miscommunication between stakeholder groups to arise from very small, surprising sources. It can be as simple as a different definition for a shared word. that's used in the same context. So you write a sentence, the other person is like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I mean. But you don't realize that that person is reading one of those words very differently until it becomes a real big problem, which I have seen recently.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for the comment. Another issue that has been treated here, and I think that we didn't really cover that much while we were talking about funding priorities and the different mechanisms of funding, is that the academic incentives versus timelines or perspectives of stakeholders, or lack of funding for specific parties or stakeholders. So, and this is, if I may also comment a little bit, is also a really hard part of the projects, because you have really sensitive ethical issues related to compensating financially the people that are working in the project from the communities, right? So if they are working directly in the project, of course, they should be compensated for their work, but also if they are engaged in other roles, or just like in terms of knowledge sharing, it might be also sensitive inside the communities to remunerate some specific people and not others. So this is a really complex situation. And does anyone else that provided that insight want to comment on that? I don't see hands raised.
Lila, I made that comment talking about the incentives and the timelines. I mean, I think most of us who have been in academia know that the time from beginning a study to producing an academic paper is often very long and is not aligned with the needs of local partners who said, hey, you did that study, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. Why don't we have anything? There's not even, a policy document or something. And so there are different pressures, timelines, and expectations. And I thought the group did a great job talking about the kinds of products that come out of TD research. But at the end of the day, most of my colleagues in academia are evaluated by the journals they publish in, the impact factor, whether or not it's in Scopus, and they don't receive credit in their academic promotion and tenure and evaluation for non-academic products. And that's true certainly in most universities in Latin America and many places in North America, I'll say from my experience.
Thank you so much, Anna. I completely agree with that, because it's a delicate balance, because everyone has its own specific interests, and we have to be honest about our own as well. The institution that we represent, if we are academics or working with an NGO or working in an intergovernmental organization, we have our own agenda as well that has to be fulfilled somehow. And I think I'll start to go on to the next slide before we get there, but the best opportunity for it is to be as honest as possible about all those agendas and try to negotiate them in the most equitable way possible as well. So managing expectations across the partners, that's also a big issue that relates to the one that we are talking about. Does the person that just put up this sticky note wants to comment on it? What was on their minds?
Yes, so that was me. I think it's very relatable to what has been said before in terms of different agendas, even power dynamics and just managing that. And often you find that there are a lot of tensions, perhaps not expressed, and so things might not move on as much as possible. And how do you then deal with those conflicts or controversies in teamwork?
Thank you so much for that. So since we are 10 minutes till the end of I think we would have a lot to talk about over here, but I'd like to pass on to the next slide, if you could go there as well. The second part here would be to identify, so it's the other side of the coin of the first slide. In your perspective, on your practice, on your approach to TD, what are the practices that you identify that can enhance equitable collaboration? So what were the solutions that you were able to find out about when you're trying to tackle and deal with the challenges that we just recognized in the first slide about funding mechanisms, expectations, different perspectives, different languages? Yeah, a humble attitude towards other ways of knowledge, considering those are also science. So this is a really interesting solution. Does the person that put up that one wants to comment on it?
I added that sticky note, Laila, that just because sometimes, or I see especially, well, from different societal actors, sometimes it's difficult to acknowledge that other ways of knowledge or being in the earth are not science or are science, because it seems like this morning I was just listening in another session here, like they were also in the African context, also asking why there is so difficult to work towards transdisciplinary. Is that because only from one discipline perspective or one person want to shine a lot or something like that? So that's why I think it's important to start with the attitude as well towards building these relationships with other people.
Thank you so much, Fanny. And I think this echoes a lot of what people are trying to recognize here, how key communication, facilitation, and exercises that really reveal those unconscious biases and recognize the underlying power structures, differences in languages, because those challenges are there when the TD project begins, but they are not clear to everyone. It's not possible to have everything clear to all engaged stakeholders before the ongoing process actually starts. So I think it really does echo a lot of has been doing here. So to be a bit more specific, does the person that mentioned the team exercise want to share an experience or something that popped to their minds when writing this? No, it's okay to feel shy, not a problem. What about the person that brought up the idea of having best communication practices and games, role-playing, the rolling to break down tensions, working, because it's really similar to the idea of team exercise. Does this person want to share?
That's me again. So I feel like I've been talking a lot, but yes, it does really touch on a lot of what has been said around communication and facilitating. So those are just examples of some of the things to try and break down, those tensions, inequalities, and so forth. But the building trust and relationships, I guess, is like a long-term kind of strategy, which eventually would then work in the long run.
Thank you. Did it? No. So it's about generating an environment for joint learning and training experiences to develop skills, translation, interpretation. So I think it's really striking to see how these group of people here together to talk about TD recognizes the importance of think about methodologies, and I use the word methodology here, not in the scientific way, methodology in the general idea of how to do it, right? So develop ways, paths, and tools that we can use to create an environment where TD is possible, right? So it's not possible to go for a TD project without at least tackling the issue of how we are going to do it, right? So it's really different from unusual science project in that sense, because you have to also think about how you're going to relate with these diverse sets of knowledges. And I think what the projects showcase here really do provide lots of insights of tools and ideas that were used to tackle that issue. So since we are 4 minutes to the end, I'd like to open the floor to the participants that put up the sticky notes in general, if they want to comment a little bit further before we close. Anyone?
Or maybe
Final
the
thoughts or
speakers,
insights?
or maybe someone from the
I
panelists.
just wanted to make a comment that I think that this community is a fantastic sort of starting place to identify tools, best practices to do this work, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we do a TD project. Although of course there are, local context has to be considered, but, fields like team science and transdisciplinary scholars are identifying ways to do this. And if we can incorporate this in a purposeful way from the beginning of the research and the research design process, then we don't have to kind of come back to it later as like an afterthought, like something we need to add to the project or add to the budget. This should be a part of the explicit design of how to do this together from day one.
Yes, Anna, I completely agree. I think there are many practices out there, but since it's a newy idea with a growing body of people doing it, it's really important that these spaces create this connection. So, just while listening to you, I was thinking about, the idea of creating the game that Sarah mentioned. And so how can I use all those experiences that were shared in future projects of applying TD research and not reinventing the wheel again and again? So that's a perfect comment for ending. So we are 1 minute to the end. I think we tried to squeeze as much juice as we could from our time together. And I'm really, really thankful for all your participation, our wonderful panelists, also the participants. Thank you so much for attending and keeping with us till the end. And I just like to promote that the IAI has an initiative that's called the TD Academy. I'm going just to put there in the chat box if you want to take a look, because there are also their experiences about applying and doing TD research that might be of interest. And follow us and subscribe to our newsletter to learn more and accompany our work on TD. Thank you all so much for coming.
And thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you,
very much.
everyone.